Hello, everyone. Welcome to Limbo. My name is João, and today I have the pleasure of sharing my conversation with my friend Zach Schenken. So, Zach is the person behind the Vitruvian podcast and the Vitruvian man. And I gotta say, he was someone that I followed a couple of months, almost a year ago, when I stumbled upon his podcast. And I really enjoyed this idea of the pyramid of three values, the pyramid of self mastery that he shared, where he basically talks about these three main focuses that we should have: vitality, truth, and beauty. And I really wanted to interview Zach. He was like, we had a couple of issues to make the interview work, but finally we were able to do it. I'm really proud about the way it turned out. We talked about, of course, these three values, but also about the inspiration behind the Vitruvian man. And he has a series of YouTube videos called Building the Vitruvian. I highly recommend that. We talked a bunch of different concepts or ideas. We talked about the framework that looks at people as if they are warriors, artists, and philosophers. We talked about his manifesto on us, like as individuals, being the resistance to things that maybe are not aligned with the better world. And we also talk about like pursuing those values and pursuing like what's healthy for you. Not only that, but throughout the conversation, Zach makes a presentation of his own experience as a human being, what he went through in different areas of his life, but also the importance of myths and stories in his life. So I feel like you're going to really enjoy this conversation. All of the links to Zach's work are in the description: his Instagram page that I recommend, his YouTube page, his podcast. So make sure you go and follow him. Okay. Now, we do, just a quick note on our sponsors. The Socratic Experience, the school where I work on. We're trying to change the way education works by bringing the Socratic dialogue into the classrooms. We're an online school from third grade to the end of high school. And if you want to know more about us, go to thesocraticexperience.com and maybe try and schedule a call if you're a parent that's interested in changing the life of your children through education. The second sponsor is, of course, Contexto, the nonprofit that hosts Limbo and holds this as a possibility. And the third one is the restaurant that gives name to the podcast, Limbo in Lisbon. If you're ever in Lisbon, go to Limbo, the restaurant, and say that the old neighbor from upstairs, João, sent you there. Okay? That being said, if you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the Spotify page. It really helps us. Okay? That being said, here's my conversation with Zach. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Limbo. My name is João, and today I have with me Zach. Zach, thank you so much for doing this. How are you, brother?
Thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate the patience, like I was saying before. I know we've been back and forth on this for a number of weeks, but it's all happening on divine timing. So I appreciate you opening the container and wanting to have me on in some of the early episodes of your show.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I really wanted to make sure that we were able to do this properly because like you inspire me a lot with your content, with your ideas, and I wanted to have like a proper conversation about them. So let's start maybe with the basic presentation. So some of the audience that I'm aiming at the podcast might know you because we have a bunch of common people in our network, and I want to interview them all. But let's say that I have people that haven't heard from you yet, like how do you present yourself? You do so many different things. Like, how's your current like personal pitch?
Yeah, it's good. I probably don't practice it enough, and I'm somebody who is intrinsically pretty label resistant. I think that language often really, really limits us, and something about the human spirit is like it feels wrong to kind of cage it in a singular term,
Yeah.
and I've always struggled with that even since a little kid. Like I looked at the future and I didn't want to just be an ER word. I didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher, just one of those things. I always admired the men of the Renaissance, like the concept of the polymath like really captured me because I always did have this broad um, interests and curiosities in the realms anywhere from engineering and invention and working with my hands all the way to the realm of philosophy and ideas and anywhere in between in the human body and anatomy. So It is something that I don't exactly have a clear pitch on, but I'd say that the nature of my content and my main mission overall is to connect as many people as possible with what they believe is their gift to give the world, and then help them and facilitate their ability to give that gift. Because I think that we were all put here for a reason. We're made in the image of God as creatures of creation. And so finding a way to tether people to a meaningful mission that fulfills them and ultimately is in service of others is kind of like, I guess, the goal, the driving factor behind what I do. And then as far as what I'm doing, I have my own podcast. I've got a YouTube channel, obviously social media platforms as well. So I'm an online guy, and I like to discuss a lot of different ideas, but I don't exactly have a singular pitch, but hopefully that sums up a lot.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Like, and I love that idea of not being able to like just share in a box. For a while, like it was hard. So when I was a jazz musician, like I always was into like the whole spiritual and personal development stuff, and it was hard for me to just say I'm a musician because there was this whole realm of my life that wasn't included in that. And a couple of years ago, like someone said, you know what? I think that you're a full-time learner. And I really enjoyed that. That was the first box that I was like, yeah, okay, that one I want to be in. Cause it's basically like part of my own philosophy just to learn about everything under the sun. So that's the only box that so far I've been kind of comfortable, getting into. So yeah, you produce content, you have your own podcast, and your whole brand is like around the Vitruvian man, which is a concept that I absolutely love. But I would love, like, in previous calls, we started to discuss like your journey towards it, like how do you end up like being where you are, and I found that story so fascinating. So maybe we can start there. Like, how did you go from being a child to having the Vitruvian and being interested in all of these different topics?
Yeah, I'll try to be concise as I can, and if there's anything specific, feel free to jump in and ask questions. But like I said, I think from a very, very young age, I was always very, very curious, and I also remember when I was little, being a pretty voracious reader, and the early stories that really captured my imagination were some of the Greek myths of the great heroes through history, and that was kind of a through line that I think had way more profound meaning than I initially probably perceived. But something about that innocent boy wanting to strive for something meaningful, connecting to the stories of Hercules, Achilles, Perseus, and that was the original entry point. And obviously, it's a pretty short jump from those quote unquote mythical stories to the realm of philosophy and ideas, but also I developed an interest in the human body, physiology, anatomy, a lot of that wanting to just kind of change my own body. Some of my early insecurities were around just being kind of a chubbier kid growing up, playing sports, but never really looking the part of the athlete. So all of this stuff was going on concurrently in my upbringing, which led me to, in university, I ended up studying biomedical engineering at Georgia Tech. So pretty rigorous institution, and a major that was probably harder than it ended up being worth to myself. But I really enjoyed my university experience, and it taught me a lot both in and outside of the classroom. And then as I was preparing to exit university and enter quote unquote the real world, I was staring down the barrel of full-time employment like a lot of university students, and was really not excited about the prospect of the jobs that were out there. It's no knock on what was out there, but I think I always had this intrinsic knowing or need and desire to be self-sustained. I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but you can't sign up for entrepreneurship. You can't check a box. You can't apply. You have to build something. So in my senior year of university, I spent a lot of time journaling and reflecting and trying to assess with a bunch of different exercises, some of which I actually work with individual clients with today, just trying to bring from the unconscious to the conscious mind what could possibly be my gift to give this world. Like, what are some of the unique advantages or edges that I have for this world? And I don't think there was a moment of divine revelation where it was like, oh, it's going to be this thing. But I think a lot of that groundwork was laid so that when opportunities presented themselves, my intuition was kind of ready to understand that that was the right choice. So when I did graduate, I took a full-time job at a medical device startup in the realm of my major of study, but I also made an investment to an online community and mastermind that kind of taught you how to build an online business. And it was my first foray into anything like that. I didn't know anything about the online world. I'd never made a piece of content. I had, an Instagram with a couple hundred followers of just friends from high school. And so it became this very much magical and natural unfolding through that program where they started prompting us like, okay, what are you going to make content about? How are you going to create content? And one of the things that was low effort, high reward was creating a podcast that you could then clip up and make a bunch of smaller pieces of content out of. It was a format that I found myself maybe naturally inclined towards because I consumed so many podcasts, and it turned out that I had, I guess, some sort of a knack for it and certainly enjoyed doing it. And that's something I've run with since. So yeah, very much like a natural unfolding, and a lot of the brand that got born out of that and the also decisions I've made downstream of that have felt a lot more, like I said, divine and magical than on my own master plan.
Yeah, planned.
And it's been this really beautiful co-creation of leaning more into my intuition, leaning more into faith. And as you probably are also aware, entrepreneurship is as much like a self-development endeavor as it is building a business. It very much forces you to go inward, confront
Absolutely.
limiting beliefs, and overcome a lot of internal stuff. So it's been very much like an upward spiral. And I guess I'm 2.5-ish years into this journey, and I'm eternally grateful for jumping into it. And I feel like for myself, very much like a one-way door. I don't see myself ever going back, and I haven't had a reason to yet.
Yeah, no, that's such a great answer, and I totally agree with the last point that we're making, where like I've met a couple of entrepreneurs, I've co-founded a couple of businesses, and it's definitely true. Like once you're starting a business, your own limiting beliefs will show up very, very fast. And it's like, and I feel like you have these different levels when you're setting up a business, and at the same time while trying to process some of your own self limitations. And there's this mistake that a lot of people do when you get past the first barrier of limitations around your own self development, and you're like, yeah, fuck yeah, I've solved it. And it's like, no, because maybe you've solved it enough to make, I don't know, maybe your first client or your first couple of clients, but then you want to scale. And once you scale, a bunch of other limiting beliefs show up. So it's almost like, and you have to process those and like grow as a person. And then you'll have the third level and the fourth. And it's like, it's this ever constant game of always developing. And going back, like, I'm curious about the different myths that we're talking about. And so have you ever read a book called 12 Men Against God, or 12 Against Gods? I think that's the name.
I'm not sure that I have.
Okay. So it's a book by William Bolitho, and I think I'm pronouncing his name right. And basically, he tells the story of 12 people that are adventurers, and that for some reason, like in their life, they challenged the odds and they built something that was very different from around their age. And one of his theories in the book, he analyzes all of these people, and one of his theories is that especially men have like a story that they read in when they were young that had such a profound impact on them that part of their lives is the journey to conquer that same story. And so, and he even talks about, so for instance, Alexander the Great, where he basically would have the Iliad by Homer with him all times. That was like his book, and his attempt was, okay, I need to somehow achieve what the heroes of these stories have achieved. And so I love the fact that you were mentioning like these Greek myths as like your first stories that really had a profound impact, and then you describe this whole journey that kind of resonates those part of those myths. So I guess my question is, first of all, if this resonates, but the second is, how did you get into those? Was those like, is that something that your parents encouraged? Were you like just drawn to them? Like, how is that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I think it deeply, deeply resonates, and I think it's not coincidental that these sort of things happen. A person whose work I think is really profound in its synthesis is Joseph Campbell, and like his concept of the monomyth,
Yeah.
the hero with 1,000 faces. This idea that we have kind of a uniform, generally speaking, a uniform hero's journey. And I think that our life in general are these kind of concentric hero's journeys. We go on these little missions.
Yeah.
It can be micro, like each year can feel like its own going out, conquering, slaying the dragon, and returning with the boon. But then, when we look back across our life, it's this macro hero's journey, right? And I think it's these stories and these myths, they are exemplars of something that is more real. The myth is more real than reality itself. It's transcendent, and these cycles that we see through great men in history, it's about the human spirit. It's representing kind of on a metaphysical level what's going on inside. So the fact that me as a young boy can still be captured by these ideals, thousands of years after Homer penned the Iliad, it's no coincidence in my opinion. And then as far as my entry point, I think my parents, I grew up in a well-educated home. Both my parents went to university, and they actually both went to law school as well. So I think just the ethic of like working hard in school and studying was encouraged. I was never like very dogmatically pushed to read or do any of these things, but something about being a young boy, you want to read about heroes and swords and dragons. And so I don't know exactly what my starting point was, but one series that I'll shout out is the Rick Riordan Percy Jackson series. I think a lot of people my age and my generation will know what that is. And it's almost like it's Greek myth light, if you will. Like it's a new story with a lot of the old same characters, and really, really beautiful set of books. I still have them on my bookshelf over there, and eternally grateful for those, because then those lead into reading, I don't know, Aragon and Aragorn, and then also The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and Star Wars as well was a very formative set of films for myself, and some of these like very iconic universes that I really like fell into and fell in love with, and found myself and versions of myself in those characters. So yeah, I couldn't exactly like trace back to like what the starting point was, but I always like to tip the cap to the Percy Jackson series.
No, totally. Yeah, that's awesome. I have a guest in the show in a future episode that I'll release, which is Nadia Williams, and she actually wrote a piece that got somehow viral in the internet around the importance of having books just laying around when you're educating a child, where it's like you never know what kind of like book will draw their attention, but you know that if you just scatter books all around the house, hopefully they'll grab something, and that might be the beginning of something amazing, which like you apparently was your case. And I love how you're describing like this idea of myth being above reality, because sometimes like that might look like counterintuitive to some people, but it's like, well, if you have something that just keeps repeating itself in transcending generations and contexts and organizations and societies, like it has to be something that's so deeply part of who we are as human beings that it will transcend your personal reality and your personal context where you inhabit, right?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, it's important, and I've gotten into arguments in YouTube comments before with using some of this language, and a lot of people, I think the materialist skeptic sort of point of view, the Church of Graphs, the modern paradigm, get very frustrated when you use terms like that. And I always press back, like when they say like that, the stories aren't real, the myths aren't real. I kind of pull a Jordan Peterson card and say like, well, what do you mean by real? And as much as that does seem semantic at first, I think it's actually extremely important, because what do we even mean by reality? And I think that when we start to like sit with that in a genuine sense, in a curious sense, it begins to get a lot weirder quicker than you would anticipate. It's less of like, okay, I can observe under a microscope this thing. It's like, well, if you keep pressing down, apparently, according to the quantum paradigm, it's less there than it is there. And it actually is both wave and particle. And so we're starting to get into this place where science is actually elucidating out that this is very much an energetic reality. It is deeply impacted by our own consciousness and the observer effect, Schrodinger's cat, double split experiment. I know I'm just dropping a lot of jargon here, but the point being is like, what even are we talking about when we talk about reality? And I think the modern language of simulation theory, this idea that potentially we're in some sort of simulated reality, almost like a meta game that either somebody wrote or we're co-creating, that's a story. That just means that we're living inside of a story, and all these little micro stories in the form of religion or myth are the competing paradigms and for the leading story that we all agree to. And so history, as it is written and given to us to believe in, is the succeeding myth of our time. And science is the succeeding myth of our time. You could also pair in potentially the Judeo-Christian ethic or story or myth for the last 2,000 years has been like a very dominating paradigm as well.
Yeah.
And it's dominating because people are believing into that system. It's the winning story right now. But when we say like what is really real, I think everything is a story. It's a competition of myth. So by deciding with the power and tool of belief what you want to believe into for the betterment of yourself and your own life, it's a powerful tool when you pair it with the awareness, which is like belief is a tool. I can aim it at the things that make my life better. And if I choose to believe X, Y, and Z thing about my personal reality, my personal abilities, maybe assembling a pantheon of gods, honoring my ancestors, believing in Jesus Christ, like whatever you choose, these things should empower your life and make it a more magical existence. And what's crazy is oftentimes you do start to see those benefits in your material reality. And it's like, okay, wow, there's clearly some sort of co-creative effect going on here with belief and quote unquote reality.
Reality. Yeah. I love that. And I feel like a lot of times what the thing that makes the difference is just being able to don't, because a lot of people will tell you, I mean they will tell me, they still do that, well, you're just cherry picking your reality, and it's like you're just choosing to believe certain things, and that's just not true. And I'm always like, you can always discuss, well, the same way you can ask, well, what do you mean by real? We can always ask, well, what do you mean by true, right? If I believe that is true, is that true? Isn't that true? But I've find that, if you are very consciously choosing what you believe in, and choosing very wisely your focus, you're able to constantly outperform your own expectations for yourself, and most of the times the expectations that others also have for you. And so it's like, in a world of, I don't know where I saw this, but I was recently talking with someone. I don't remember who he was, but he was saying something like, in a world of Murphy's laws, we should be more of Yoprin's law. I think at Yoprin's, not sure the name, where it's basically like the inverse of a Murphy law, where if everything that can happen, everything that's good that can happen will happen, something like that. And it's like, and if in sure, you can cherry pick things, but if you're doing that and you're not hurting other people, you're actually benefiting yourself, you're constantly growing, you're feeling like your different areas of your life keep improving because you're always making this effort of, this is where I'm focusing my attention, this is what I'm believing in, this is, and once you believe in that, then that of course will affect your actions, so you'll behave in a different way. If you're making all of this pipeline and it's increasing like your frequency, or it's increasing the way you behave, I feel like that's such a good thing, and I don't see why people would choose not to do so, right? But a lot of people will be trapped by this notion of, well, but that's just not the truth, so I'll just won't do it. It's like, well, okay, if you're happy that way, or if for some reason you feel like that's the best for you, then that's fine. But yeah, let me ask you something. So one of the questions that my friends, it's one of those ongoing discussions is ego something good or bad? So you have like these two very different theories where people are like, kill your ego is your enemy, kill your ego, that all Ryan Holiday spiel, and this idea of, just killing your ego basically. Then you have other people that are like, no, your ego is your best friend. Like, you need to have a strong ego. You need to have a very high ego. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like in all things, the middle way is the truth, and everything requires nuance, and our reality is governed or dominated by paradox. So, like, the truth is sitting at the point of paradox where both are true at the same time, and we need to get away from the idea that we have to like cling to one or the other. But I will advocate for one party because it is against the current zeitgeist, and I think it's also more productive. I wrote a piece about this a while back, kind of elucidating this idea that ego is not your enemy, and it's because I just don't see, and like this was kind of like the opening premise of the newsletter, was that I don't walk around and not get encountered with, and I literally can't conjure to mind the last person I met with too much self-belief, like an overflowing amount of self-belief where it was either somewhat harming their life or pouring onto others and being somewhat arrogant. But every single day, I meet people, whether online or in person, with crippling self-esteem issues, like the inability to see themselves as powerful, as agentic, as
That's a
somebody who
great
can
point.
even create a better life for themselves. And so if we choose to believe about belief that we can aim it at things for the empowerment of our life, I think it is in a much higher service to yourself and to other people to believe that you are super powerful, you are super talented, you were put here for a specific reason, you can change your reality for the better. In fact, you're not only super capable, but God wants it for you, and it's good for yourself, it's good for your family, it's good for the world at large. Um, so I would say like it's to me it's like a psyop. It's like, why are we telling the masses with like bestseller books to like damper your ego and continue to like self-suppress and genuflect and have this eternal, again, I think it ties very much into the kind of the Christian paradigm and of like just eternal repentance. You're always somehow this broken toy that needs to kneel and apologize constantly. I just don't see it that way. I don't think that we are that way. I think we are made in the image of God, which means we are also extremely powerful creators of reality. And I don't think that we would be put here for some sort of like meek and humble and small existence. And when I tie it back into myth and story, like that little boy version of myself, he wanted to be great. He wanted to be powerful. He wanted to accomplish things for the strength of his name and his family. And again, those are intuitive, right? Like unfortunately, I wasn't raised with like a very strong, quote unquote, like family legacy tradition. We don't have founding documents. These are all things I'm working on now, but we don't have like a story of how our family got here. We don't have like your name means this, you need to go on and be great. And that's something I hope to imbue in my progeny, like my kids in the future. But the point is that there's something even more real about that. Like whether we have a constitution or not, I think it's like Nietzsche talks about this, right? Like the will to power. I think
Hmm.
people, to varying degrees, but intrinsically in man, there's this will to power. You want to be powerful. Things like strength, beauty, and power are intrinsically good, and you should strive for those things. And it's the philosophy, as he calls it, like the slave morality, this idea that you should be weak.
Yeah.
And again, I'll caveat this with the point that I entered with, which is like it's nuance, right? You don't want to get to the place where you have an inflated sense of self and arrogance that is making other people less likely to engage with you, being super obnoxious, possibly self-destructive, thinking like you can't get hurt or you can't possibly make a mistake. You always want to be able to audit yourself and self-correct and understand where you sit in a hierarchy. You are not God himself. You're below that, but you are very powerful, and in my opinion, a lot more powerful than the zeitgeist is going to push you to feel. So if you've got to choose how to feel, why not feel powerful? Why not wake up every day and look in the mirror and say like, I am that guy. I am the person who
Mm.
can change my life and have a meaningful and powerful existence. Why not me? I think that
Yeah.
that is just more likely to serve your life. And as I've said before, when you're the highest expression of yourself, that is an act of service to the world because then you can benefit your environment as well.
Yeah, I think that that's part of like what I say when I had this conversation where it's like, because at least in my life this has been true. The moments where I feel like the more confident and the more professional, and the moments where I know that I'm doing the things that are putting me at the top of my game, those are also the moments where I feel like I'm more inclined to serving other people and to help other people and to be, maybe worried is not the right, uh, like aware of their needs. And because it's, and sometimes when the opposite is true, when maybe like you have people that are not that good and they're in a low place, they end up doing things for others, but they do it from a place of selfishness instead of love. And I think that that's very important. Like this is a conversation that I've had a couple of times with my girlfriend, where it's like, what if you're constantly sacrificing in the name of others, because you're so selfless, and it's like, oh, I'm doing this for love, and I'm doing this because I admire so much, but then when something goes wrong, you're like, well, but look at all of the times that I sacrificed myself for you. It's like, well, then that wasn't love, that was selfishness, right? You were being it's not, because if you're doing it just because you want to, out of love, out of a place of compassion, out of place of trust, out of place of confidence, you do it and you don't care because it's the right thing for you to do. It's the thing that you feel like you need to do. And so I'm totally on board on you. With you on that. So let's switch into the Vitruvian Man. For someone who hasn't heard that, like, how would you describe the meaning of what being a Vitruvian Man is?
Yeah, I'll start with paying homage to where I stole the name from, but the term itself or the name comes from most famously the Vitruvian Man sketch. It's on this shirt that I'm wearing here. I know we laughed about that last time, so I made sure to put it back on. But yeah, so essentially the famous sketch from Leonardo da Vinci with you have the proportional man in the circle and the square, kind of laying out the golden ratio of the human body. He penned that sketch based on previous sketches from other concurrent Italian polymaths and architects at the time. There were kind of similar sketches that were derivative, but the initial name comes from Vitruvius, who was a Roman architect famous for his work called De Architectura. And so if you travel to Europe today, you can see a lot of the famous churches and basilicas. They'll be laid out in a cross pattern where you have the main chapel and then these kind of side patterns. And Vitruvius famously believed that the human body was the principal source of all beauty and proportion. And so buildings, likewise, architecture should reflect that. Now, downstream of that, we have the Vitruvian Man sketch. And Da Vinci was one of those characters when I was a little kid that like captured my imagination. Because one thing that I don't really go into with my content, but like I love to make things with my hands. Like I built my bed, I built the desk that this camera is sitting on, I built this boom arm, like built my bookshelf, everything, literally everything in my life that I can touch, I like to have a customized version of. And so he was an inventor first and foremost. And so I loved that idea, but he didn't limit himself. You know, he studied anatomy, philosophy, botany, astrology, all of it. So Da Vinci was very formative, and when I was going through that period of like quote unquote starting my brand online, the mentors in that course were like, okay, what are you going to name it? And this is one of those things that just kind of came to me and I felt like was very beautiful, intuitive and divine revelation, if you will. And it, from the name kind of built out the ethos. And so what does it mean to be a Vitruvian Man? I've kind of distilled it down to 3 core virtues, which manifest in 3 identities that you kind of embody. So the virtues are beauty, vitality, and of course I'm losing it here. It's in my bio.
Let me see if I can find it real quick.
Yeah. Do you know them off the top of your head?
I have it in my notes. So
Truth.
Sorry. Exactly.
Truth, beauty, and vitality, and those correspond to the identities that you kind of essentially embody for those virtues, those being philosopher in the pursuit of truth, the warrior in the pursuit of physical vitality, and the artist in the pursuit of creating beauty and making the world a more beautiful place. So those are kind of the core tenets. They're like deeply ingrained in my personal philosophy, and this brand is very much an expression of that. But you start at the base of the pyramid. You need to take charge and domain over your physical vessel as it is, you know, so-called the temple of God. I very much believe that. And you won't be able to pursue higher ideals like truth and beauty when you're sick and unwell. And in most people's cases, it's not even sick or unwell. It's just in kind of a low malaise of poor health. You know, you wake up with inflammation, brain fog, poor sleep, you're bloated, you feel gross. It's very hard to look upward, basically, when you're trapped in that lower state. And I think the world is set up to keep us there. So you need to take an active role in investing in your physical vessel. And then from there, above that, you can start to say like, okay, I feel fantastic. Why am I here? What are we supposed to be doing here? You can ask some of those larger questions about purpose, mission. And once you connect to that meaningful mission, you can then create beauty in this world and serve others. And that's the realm of the artist, right? I think we were made in the image of God, which means we're not only creation, but creators. And it is intrinsic to our being to create things. And it doesn't mean you have to be painting Renaissance paintings on the wall. It could literally be a podcast. It could be writing a Substack article. It could be any like little or profound act of creation, but it's a nourishment for your soul internally. And then again, it's an act of service to the world. So that's what it means to be a Vitruvian man, as I kind of have established it in the ethos. Um, and I think the world would be and will be a better place when more people are kind of embodying that internal renaissance.
Yeah, this is a beautiful answer. And I want to go into detail like how what are some of the practices that people can do in order to develop each one of them. And I want to start with the physical body. And you probably noticed there's this meme online where it's like, man, don't go to the therapy, they'll just go to the gym or something like that. And what I love about that and about the answer that you just gave is that it's really hard to think beautiful thoughts and look and have like a very clear, beautiful perspective on life if you really hate what you see in the mirror. And so, and of course, and this is nothing against therapy, like that works for a lot of people, but sometimes the kind of change that you need is a change that really changes your like your body, your physiology, right? And you know, there's a gazillion different studies showing different benefits that you have by doing physical exercise and by doing weight training and all of that. But I feel like that's one of the most important things that you can do is just to understand that regardless of looking at your body as a temple of God or whatever it is, like just in order to think more beautiful thoughts, you need to feel more like beautiful outside with your body, with your own body, right? And so in the warrior, I think that it's a easy one to just say to people, you know, well, start working out, start paying attention to your diet, like do all of that. I'm way more curious in understanding like what are some of the principles or actions that you think people can do in order to develop the truth and the beauty aspect of the Vitruvian.
Yeah. So would you like me to start at like the warrior or?
Whatever you prefer, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I try my best in general, but especially with physical practices to not be too prescriptive because like you kind of alluded to, you need to find what works for you. That goes for worldviews and larger things as well. But I'm very much pro trial and error, and I'm not particularly religious or dogmatic with certain diets or certain training protocols. Now, I think there are huge buckets of things that are going to serve everybody. And I also think health is such a noisy space. Everybody's trying to sell their specific movement practice. You know, the kettlebell guy will be like, all you need is a kettlebell. And then the bodybuilding guy is like, you need to go train only hypertrophy. And then you have the natural movement people and the back chain and the knee guy and the back guy. And then you get into the world of diet and there's everybody's got their own thing, the high, whatever. Like it's just an infinite well of people selling their ideology. And it's no knock to any of those people making their living, but as the individual, the consumer, the person listening to this, it is super overwhelming. I kind of tried to break it down in a previous article I also wrote and put a post out about on Twitter with the spheres of vitality, this idea that like at the core, there's like really, really big needle moving fundamentals. And then it's only after you master that like really, really deep fundamental layer that you even need to worry about the next thing. And then
Everything
at
else.
some point, you'll eventually be looking at like getting that last 1% and getting like red light panels and all these supplements and all this stuff that's where all the advertising dollars are, but it's not actually where you get the most bang for your buck. Getting outside every day, looking at the sun, touching the ground, walking, getting a quality water source, a quality electrolyte source, eating whole foods. I like one of my mutuals and previous guests on my podcast. He just says like on his story all the time, he'll post a picture of what he's eating and he'll say, just eat real food. And I think that's like a great razor for the world we live in now because everyone's trying to sell you raw meat, rape heat, whatever, something, right? Some sort of school that you need to like follow the rules. But at the end of the day, if you just eat real food that isn't poison, you'll get most of the results you want. Same thing with just getting outside every day, fresh air, as much sun as you can, get walking as much as you can. You don't need to hit 10K. You don't need to hit 15K steps. You just need to walk more. Starting there and then seeing wherever you are. Obviously with clients, it's like you got to meet people where they're at. Some people are further down the line. They might be in chronic stress state from their nervous system, so there needs to be some regulatory practices there. I haven't even mentioned sleep, getting your circadian rhythm in dial. Yeah, I mean, there's just like a lot to start with, but
Yeah.
mastering those fundamentals, I think, is super, super critical. I'll kind of hop off the mic to see if you have
Yeah,
anything
no,
you want to jump in
no,
on.
yeah. I was just thinking about like I actually tweeted about this recently, where so I lived in the biggest city in Portugal for a while, in Lisbon, and a couple of years ago I moved to this very small pescatory village, in the west, like near the sea, a place I absolutely love since I was a little boy, and I wanted to live here for my whole life, and now we're here, and one of the things that changed was because this is such a small village, if I want to get meat or if I want to get fish or if I want to get vegetables, like there's only one or two places that I can go. I have a supermarket, but then like I have like a butcher and a lady that goes to the fish and all of that, and the quality just way better than what I was eating when I was in Lisbon. Because in Lisbon, like in a big city, you would go into the supermarkets, you'd get the things. You know, I was barely cooking at all. It was like either pre-made food or something like that. And then you go here and you meet these people, and they're like, well, you know, if you ever want to see the lamb that's giving you like those chops, just let me know and I'll walk you to the farm so you can see it. And it's like, and just first of all, the food tastes way better, but the overall mood and the way you feel and the amount of energy that you have is absolutely different. It's like it's a huge difference. And sometimes just making that change of, as you were saying, like eating real food, or just making sure that you at least have some care on what are you putting in your body, makes the whole difference in terms of energy, in terms of like how you're feeling, the results that you're having on the gym. So absolutely with you on that. Yeah. Do you want to add anything else, or you want to jump into the truth and beauty?
Yeah, I mean, we could spend the rest of the podcast talking about health. I have so many thoughts, but I think another compelling question to ask is like, none of the stuff that we've touched on is groundbreaking. I think if you
Oh,
asked
yeah.
even the most unhealthy person you know, and you were just like, all right, give me the top 5 things that you think would make your life better and get you in perfect health, they'd probably hit like all 5,
Yeah.
just like move your body more, get outside, sleep
Eat
better,
better,
drink
sleep
more
better.
water, eat real
Yeah.
food. So I think the question becomes like, why aren't you taking the obvious action? We can get into the nuance. We
Great
can turn you
question.
into a superhuman athlete with performance and training and all that stuff. Like we can get there for anybody, but for the person who is in low health, like why aren't you taking those early actions? And I think um, it's often because of limiting beliefs and like kind of a crippling relationship with your own self-esteem, and you're not taking those acts of love. A good analogy I've heard before is like, if I, Zach, were to say, hey, I'm going to step out of my body for 6 months and I need you to take care of this thing. So I'm going to park it here. Just take care of it, maintain it. You don't have to change it. Just keep it as healthy as you can while I go take a vacation, and then I'll come back in 6 months. Like, you would be very invested in taking care of that body. You would give it water every single day. You'd make sure it go to sleep every single day at the right time, sunlight, all this stuff, right? And you'd even probably want to make it more beautiful, but make sure I get a tan, make sure I spend even more time outside, even more time moving, take it to the gym. And so the point is like, there's a disconnect somewhere for a lot of people that if you're not acting that way, that sense of ownership, that sense of pride that you would take care of somebody else's, why aren't you doing that same thing for your vehicle, your physical body? And it's like a disconnection of self. It's a disconnection of love. And initially, to start that journey, before you get to the place where you love working out and you're just the person who's doing all these healthy things on quote unquote autopilot, to start that journey, you need a little bit of tough love. This is where the discipline actually does come into play, where you're actually going to have to early on force yourself a little bit. Like, I really don't want to do it. I really fucking hate this, but I am going to go for a walk when I don't want to. I am going to make sure that I throw out all the bad shit that's in my pantry and then try to only get whole food groups out from here. And externalizing that accountability early on, I think, is a critical needle mover. Like, if you can't and have not in the past gotten yourself to do it, have somebody else hold you accountable, whether it's the person you're living with, your partner, your roommate, or hiring a coach. Like, do whatever is necessary, because like you alluded to, the feeling you get, you can't give that feeling to somebody until they walk it. We can yap
Yeah.
all day long about like, you'll feel so good, but like when you're in that low health state, I don't think people understand the delta. Like, and what's crazy is like once you get to the place where you're very healthy, and then you for a day go back and eat shitty food, or you stay up late going to a concert, or you go out with your old friends and drink, or whatever it is, like if you go back into that old behavior that potentially people are living in constantly, the contrast is stark, and you realize like, wow, like I am so privileged to be living on the other side of this thing. And for the people that haven't gotten the taste of the other side yet, they just don't have context for how much more vibrant your life is and how much easier it is to make those other downstream decisions. Because that same unhealthy person probably also works a job that they're unfulfilled with. They don't have a meaningful mission. They're not creating in any sense. And
Yeah.
those are deeply interlinked. We're living in a body mind. Like there's a huge, you can't separate the two. You cannot separate your ability to think clearly and manifest thoughts of the divine and all this like stuff we talk about on podcasts. You can't get there with an impure vessel, and vice versa. Like they feed into each other. So you're either in the downward spiral or you're in the upward spiral. And to enter the upward spiral, you need to act with a little bit of discipline and a little bit of faith up front. And I promise that downstream of that, it becomes easier, and not only easier, but you're excited to do it because you see all these other benefits that aren't immediately obvious.
Yeah, and I would even say, and at least this is true for me. Once I went through that process, you can then look at like what you used to do, and it's like the hero's journey where you're back at this, not at the same place, but you're back at a given context where you may even choose. You know what? Today I'm going out with my friends, and I'm going to have a whiskey and a cigar, and I'm just going to enjoy myself. And but you do it because the motivation behind doing it is way different than the one that you had before actually going through all of that process of cleaning everything that wasn't there, and making sure that you were optimizing your health first, right? Because maybe a lot of times, as you were saying, like body and mind are connected, right? And if you're working on a job that you hate, you probably, you want to have like those rush of sugar and dopamine, and you want to like, I don't know, eat whatever bullshit food you want to over and over again, and stuff your face in food, because at least you get a glimpse of pleasure to compensate for the fact that you just spent 8 hours doing something that you really hate, right? But then once you go back and you actually are living a line, and you feel like your values are present in your actions and in your life, and you have a positive worldview, if you want to go out and you want to do one of those things, it's like you're not you're I don't know, you're not drinking to forget about the fact that you had a lousy job or something like that. You're drinking because you want to hang out with your friends, you want to enjoy that very old whiskey or something like that, right? And but people do need to go through the process of first cleaning everything and cleansing everything, and then it's like once the hero's journey ends, like you're going at the same place and you're looking at things, but you're looking at it from a very different perspective.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm obviously I'm a self-declared tinfoil hat person, and so I think it's no coincidence that the entire system is set up with all of these very easy access, high dopamine, but very toxic outlets for self-medication, because that's what you're talking about. It's like you're numbing the questions that are gnawing at your spirit, like why are you here? What are you doing with your life? Why aren't you happy? All these like things that are just eating at your soul, and it digs at everyone. And so instead, to avert feeling that pain, you medicate with food, you eat the junk food, you stay up late playing video games, consume mindlessly on social media, go out drinking every single weekend to forget about how shitty the week was. Like, and it's all right there, and it's cheap, and it's high access, it's encouraged, it's advertised heavily to keep people in that downward spiral. And like I said, like there's no stasis. You're either getting worse and downward spiraling, or you're upward spiraling, and you're feeding that thing. And it has to be a conscious decision to change directions. But fortunately, the same force of momentum that pulls you down can be pulling you up, but you have to choose. You have to decide.
Yeah, absolutely. I would add though that I feel like even though there's a force that once you start like the momentum going, you can this the same way that it pushes you down, it can also elevate you. But I would say that even just like the gravity is there. So even if you create momentum upwards, it's harder to keep going up than it's just to descend. Just because descending is taking in consideration the system that we live in and the society that we live in, just easier to go down because everything is way more accessible, uh, pushing you down than actually lifting you up. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to go into the truth and the beauty because those are I'm really curious about. So let's say that I want to develop more truth in my life. Like, how would I do that? What are the practices that you think that people should do in order to have more of that in their lives?
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, I try my best to stay away from prescription because I do think that just like the hero's journey, it has to be individually actualized. And a lot of this stuff, like just like you can't think yourself out of bad thought loops, it's pretty hard to like use a piece of paper and find your way to your meaningful mission and like figure out what your purpose is. Now, I do a ton of work in that space, like helping people uncover that through kind of exercises. A place with a number of those that's like a free resource for people is you can go to a previous podcast of mine called the Da Vinci Blueprint, which is essentially like some of the most potent exercises I know for self-reflection and finding potentially what could be your mission to give the world. But additionally, like it's laid out basically like the self, the mission, and the vision, starting inward and then looking outward towards what you want to do for your life. But yeah, I honestly think you're going to need to, I'm a big advocate of like carving out stimulus-free time for myself so that I like kind of like habit stack. I make sure that during my long walk every single day, which I try to get, around the 10K steps per mark number, I'll make sure that I'm not listening to a podcast and I'm not on my phone. I'm just walking with my thoughts, and that's it. So like creating an empty container for ideas and thoughts to ruminate. And I also think that there's something special about the kind of hypnotic or rhythmic motion of walking that helps you think more clearly. But whether it's every day or whether it's once a week, maybe Sunday morning is another time I advocate for, just like when it feels very chill, you have the time, there's not a lot of pressure from your life, sitting down with a piece of paper and a pen and even just prompting yourself, like go back to high school English class and ask one question to yourself, like, am I happy? Or what do I think my gift is to give? What are my top 5 strengths? What are my top 5 most potent interests? I would encourage people to actually go to the Da Vinci Blueprint document because it has a bunch of stuff that I'm not going to like spend the entire podcast going through the different exercises because they're written out for a reason. But on a high level, I'd say a time intentionally curated and protected for self-reflection where you're not taking in any sort of stimulus, you're not listening to a podcast, you're not reading a book, you're not watching a movie, there's nothing on in the background, there's no one else around, no other human being, you just have to create stillness. And a lot of wisdom traditions, a lot of religions talk about, you'll only hear the voice of God when you're silent. And I think part of what they're talking about is this idea of like curating self-reflection. And I don't think it has to be this kind of like big bear of meditation that it's very hard to approach for a lot of people, where it's like, okay, do I sit on my knees or do I sit crisscross applesauce? Where do I put my hands? It's too much. And I think meditation is out of reach and impractical for a lot of people. But the term meditation or having a meditative practice is for everyone. And in my opinion, it's just creating a still and quiet environment, whether you're walking, seated, staring out on a balcony, like putting yourself in nature, I think is very helpful. So if you have a place to be outside, like walk to your favorite cafe once a week, sit alone and look at the street or look at the beach or the forest or wherever you happen to be, put yourself away from inputs. And when you have that empty container, you'll be surprised what starts to conjure up, like your thoughts about yourself. And if you just have a pen and paper ready, you can just note things down, simply just try to notice what's going on in your awareness. And these are the steps that you can start to curate that internal space. And then another thing I'm a huge advocate of is consuming the thoughts of the great thinkers, the people that have time-tested ideas about some of these big questions. Because if you can look humbly and say, like, I'm probably not going to think profoundly more about the what is God question or why are we here question than somebody like Plato or Descartes or Pascal or any of these dudes, Buddha. Like, we have all of human history basically at our fingertips, or at least what they've given us. Start there. Pick somebody you've always thought about or always heard. If you've been hearing a lot of synchronicities, like everybody's talking about this Nietzsche guy or everybody's talking about this Carl Jung guy, start there. Just pick up one of the books, be curious. If you don't like it, put it back down. But if you fill your brain with that kind of quality of material, you're going to think higher quality thoughts than if you listen to just YouTube videos or just podcasts or, God forbid, just like endless scroll on short form. You want to get out of that world that's high dopamine, low friction to the place where you're actually sitting down with a physical book, reading. It's going to make you sharper. You'll speak better. You'll think clearer. And then you're loading your brain with a bunch of amazing ammunition so that when you are thinking about God, you're like, well, Plato said this, and that actually resonates with me a lot, but I don't agree with what he said about this other thing. Let me explore who was the biggest, and you could use ChatGPT, who was the biggest counter-arguer to Plato at the time. Boom, that gives you another guy. Now you unlock somebody else. And that's just kind of how I would backtrace doing this kind of stuff. I do it because I can't not. I just have this insatiable curiosity. But for somebody like myself, like I was alone for a lot of years. I didn't have anybody to talk to. I didn't have a platform. So I made my friends with the great thinkers in the books. And I think that's served me extremely well. And it's like allowed me to be who I am today and, think what other people seem to think are interesting thoughts.
Yeah, it's like that's one of the things that I always say to my students. It's like reading a book is a cheat code because you're downloading, like somebody spent hours and hours thinking about something and trying to digest it in a way that you can understand in like a fraction of the time. So if you go through that book, like it's a cheat code, and I don't know, it's weird because people are always like, yeah, so that sounds good, but I don't think it works. And I'm like, look, I have a degree in music and I've worked with some of the biggest companies in my country, and all of them, like the barrier of entry was like, well, what's your degree? And I'm like, well, I don't have one on what you're expecting, but I did read like 300 books on the specific topic that you want me to talk about. So let's compare. Let's see if I can make your people like work better or not. And it comes to a point where it's like, well, you just confirm this belief of people just care about the outcomes, especially in the business world. What people care is if you're like a trainer, a coach, whatever it is, and you're working with a company or even with individual clients, but with companies and businesses, leaders, what they want is, can you get my people to the next level? And they don't care about if you have a psychology degree or a philosophy degree or whatever. They care about you being able to do that. And the best way that you can do that is being armed with as much ammo, as you were saying, as possible. And you get ammo by reading as much as possible, by having all of these different ideas. Because as you were saying, like there comes to a moment where you can actually start making your own connections. Because you've read like these 5 books that are completely different between themselves, but you can start to find a certain connection that maybe other people couldn't, and that's what makes you different. Like I was recently doing this talk for a big company here, because one of my I was invited to give like this TED talk and all of that, and it related with the idea of how if you learn the basics of improvisation, this is my belief, if you learn the basics of improvisation, of jazz improvisation, you can live your life with a higher level of quality, performance, etc. And so, I was called back to give a talk on this, and one of the things that I was talking with the guy that invited me was, like, one of the things that I did was I was reading so much about human behavior, and in the back of my mind I had this question of, because I was still a jazz musician, like, how does this relate to jazz? How does this relate to jazz? How does this make me a better musician? And by having that question, like, you start to craft your own ideas in your own worldview, and that what makes you different from everyone else. So of course it's a cheat code, and people should definitely pursue like having moments of self-reflection, as you were saying. But I'm a big advocate also on reading and making sure that you spend time thinking thoughts, as you were saying, of people that they're going to think about these issues way better than you do. So why not inhabit their minds for a while and then seeing what resonates and changing your worldview based on that?
Yeah, it's one of the most asymmetric, nonlinear opportunities you have in your life, and it's unsexy at face value, I suppose, to somebody who doesn't read and like seems like this big thing, like I'm not a reader,
Yeah.
all these like limiting beliefs and language. First of all, stop saying that. Like that, start with the language you use to describe yourself. Like you're not somebody who is not a reader. You just aren't reading right now, and you can start tomorrow, and then now you're a reader. And then additionally, like if you don't want to read, you don't have to. I just like that is potentially why people won't remember your name. Like to use the little Achilles quote, like if you want to be great, you're going to have to do hard and unconventional shit. And if you want to be completely separated from the average person, then the average person reads 0 books per year. If you read 1 book each year new, you're 100% better than that person. And I'm a very slow reader. One of my goals for this year actually is to learn speed reading to improve my rate of reading, just because I read so much. I want to be able to get through more material. But even last year, as like a self-proclaimed very slow reader, and I'm not trying to be humble, like I actually just read slowly, I still got through, I don't know, including the Bible, the entire Bible, plus 14 books or 13 books or something.
Awesome.
Slow reader. Like, but I just decided that every day I'm going to read. And you have the time. If you look at the screen time on your phone, if it's over an hour, there's your reading time. If it's over 5 hours, now you could read, volumes and volumes per day, maybe books per day. Like you have so much more time than you're admitting to yourself. So you just have to decide, like, this is a priority for me. And again, I'm anti like dogma or religion. So don't just read Nietzsche because Zach says Nietzsche's cool or whatever. Like if you find it dry or it doesn't reach you, like you talked about the kid, like having books around the home, that's where I'm at, where when people recommend books, I just add it to this ongoing list I have. And then when I'm looking for my next book, I just intuitively, I'm like, what am I curious about? Which of these titles just jumps off the page? And I kind of follow it along that just random path. And that's how I choose the books to read. It's not like this, I'm gonna go through all of the Harvard classics, or I'm gonna read every work of Homer first, and then I'm gonna go. You're not taking a class. You're just living life. Read what you want.
Exactly.
Read whatever the hell you want.
Yeah.
It'll make you better. You'll write better. You'll think better. You'll have cooler shit to say at dinner conversations. Like you'll just instantly be a way better version of yourself. And it's damn near free. Like I like to buy my books, physical copies, and you can get them used in the U.S. There's this website called Abe Books, ABEbooks.com. $3 a book. $3. Like nothing's that cheap. Food isn't even that cheap anymore.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. So let's go into beauty. And how would you go about cultivating more beauty in your life?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think ideally you want to get to the place where you've shifted yourself from consumer to creator. That's the path that you want to get to for a more enriching life, not only internal fulfillment but externally giving some sort of gift to the world. But that's also pretty daunting if you're just a regular person going to a job, you've never made anything in your life before. We can get there, but that's not probably where I would start. I would start actually with just curating your consumption towards more quality things. Obviously, there's the diet side of it. We already went over that. But like we're talking about with books, instead of watching Netflix, read a book. Instead of watching Netflix, listen to a podcast. Instead of scrolling, curate the things that you put in your brain as more meaningful, like go on a talk to a friend. And then if you aren't in the place where you're going to make beautiful things, we have this ability, like I said, I have the kind of like, I'm on the end point neurotic, like literally everything I own, I want to custom make for myself. Like I chose and made this specific pendant, like my keychain is a specific way. I'm super schizo about it all, but I think it's an opportunity. Like if you're going to have something every single day, like this pen, I made this like metal pen. I took an old mechanical pencil and I put like a pen cartridge that I wanted to into it, machined like the tip for myself. The point is like, this is an everyday object I use every single day. I have the choice to make this meaningful to me and to make this beautiful. It's just a free opportunity for more design and to see myself as more of a creator and to see the world more beautifully. Everything, your wallet, your laptop, your backpack, your water bottle, you can choose to make these things like sacred objects to yourself, like imbue your life with a little bit more magic. And then additionally, I would say the same thing for your digital landscape as well. Have a wallpaper on your phone and laptop that inspires you. Like I there's a Renaissance painting on my laptop that's behind the tab that I see you on right now. My phone wallpaper has a picture of my both my younger brothers that makes me smile every time I pick my phone up. It's these little types of things that you can start to curate your environment. Like pick a painting that you think is cool online and buy it on Amazon, put it up on your wall. Now your room is more beautiful. Get a plant. It's these small things, but there's, like we talked about with that kind of interplay of mind and reality. When you start to change your physical reality, it's also going to inform the thoughts that you make. And I think that when you surround yourself with more beauty, you're going to start to curate more beautiful thoughts. You're going to start to feel better. Your mood will be elevated. And then it's like, okay, well, what's my gift to give? Like if I have I'm consuming all this cool stuff, like maybe I can make something. And again, your vehicle, like I could never, I don't want to limit myself, but I currently am not at the place where I can paint to save it, to give a damn at all. I love the
Yeah.
Renaissance paintings, but I don't know if I spent my entire life trying, I could recreate something like that. That's just not my lane. But I see my podcast and verbal communication as one of my outlets of creation. I also love the practice of writing my weekly newsletter. I'm trying to get better and better at writing a newsletter so that one day I can write a book, and it will be not just some book that's out there, but a great book that people return to and are transformed by and want to hold on to and pass down. And I'm only going to get there through repetition and practice. So yeah, just choosing something. And I also think, one of the exercises, if you go to the Da Vinci Blueprint, you'll see a lot of the internally focused exercises are looking backwards, because up and until now, all the evidence you have in your life is your case study for yourself. So a lot of times that stuff that we're attracted to as a kid are like little breadcrumbs or Easter eggs for what our mission could or might be. And so looking back, like if you were the kid that was singing and making music all the time, well, maybe bring that back into your life. If you were the kid that was drawing on the walls and sketching in every little blank piece in a notebook, maybe once a week, draw a little bit, sketch a little bit, try to curate that in your adult life, bring that back, and you might find something really, really meaningful. If you were always the kid running around with the little camera, making little movies, like maybe you should start a YouTube channel. Maybe even if you don't post it, maybe you should start making little films, little vignettes about like your weekend trips, like film the next hike you go on. And it's that subtle shift to bring back those magical and childlike elements that were there when life was quote unquote simpler and when you were just a kid. Bring that back. Don't let the world take that from you. And with the advent of social media, if your goal is also to make it quote unquote productive, you can also monetize anything. It's amazing. You can find your people by putting it out into the world, and the outsized return is incalculable. We're having this conversation. We wouldn't know, you and I wouldn't know we exist on Earth. Human beings never, there's no chance we would ever run into each other unless I took a trip to Portugal and just happened to meet you at a cafe, which maybe that'll happen one day. But the point being is, like, now when I go to Portugal, I can hit you up because I know you're there and you know I'm here. This is insane. Like we shouldn't know we exist, but it's only through the advent of me putting myself out there so that people can judge me by my thoughts and what I create, and then you being attracted into that universe because there's so much alignment between what you find interesting and I do. And this co-creation we're in right now is a product of just that. So I think it's very daunting for people to be like, I don't know if I want to be an influencer, or I don't want to be a creator. You don't have to. You don't have to go that far, but just start with like the everyday objects, the places you inhabit, and start to subtly move yourself to the place where you have some sort of act of genuine creation. And that's probably where I would encourage people to start.
Absolutely. There's a great book called "Show Your Work" by Austin Kleon, where a couple of months ago, we were me and a partner on this project that we have. We were invited for like this kind of seminar, kind of Q&A with students from a couple of art courses, and we were talking about this, where like this book actually influenced both me and my partner. Where basically his point is, right now everything that you produce can actually be somehow painted as content. So just show that. And if for some reason you're like having struggle with, I don't know what to create, I don't have an interesting life, I don't have I'm not good at all of that, start by curating. like look at things that you enjoy and like curate them in a specific place. Let your taste be the main thing, and then start build based on that. And that way you're not like putting yourself out there, quoting, meaning you're not like actually producing something specifically, but you're at least by curating, you're arranging things, and that on itself is content, and then you can jump into your own shit once you feel comfortable with. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I love that. I love that you're thinking about beauty as like things that you can literally make. That's actually part of what I'm taking away from our conversation, is like I need to ask my granddad to use me like his storage and just try and build a table or something like that, just to get my hands dirty on that sense. So that's amazing. But I do have like one last question before we wrap it up. Uh, so in your Twitter page, which of course we'll leave the description for your Substack, the Vinci Blueprint, and your Twitter. But in the Twitter page, you have like a pinned tweet, which is a small video, which is basically your manifesto. And in a manifesto, one of the quotes that really resonates with me is that your great war is within. And so I would love for you to explain what you mean by this before we wrap it up.
I love that. And to this day, I'd say the Vitruvian Manifesto is one of the, if not the thing that I'm most proud of. It was something that I spent like 2 or 3 weeks drafting, and it's literally like a small stanza. It might be like 80 words or something like this, but it, I spent time, I brought together, like you said, I started with curating, actually. I tried to look for, okay, what are the mission statements, the quotes, the one-liners that like really impacted me. I talk about this on the podcast where I first outlined it. And ultimately, I think it's like an expression of exactly what I'm trying to do here. So I'd encourage people to like listen to that video, whether you want to clip it into this podcast or whatever. The video is like, it's dramatic, whatever. We have music and there's little clips, but the writing itself, I think, is like what matters the most to me. And yeah, your great war is within. I think the ethos of the Vitruvian is that like we all want, I'm just going to assume based on who I know follows me and who I can assume follows you, like we want a better existence for ourselves, but also for the world. We see and look outward, and the world is broken. In the manifesto, it talks about the world's being lost, right? It's full of degeneracy and all these other things that we see as problematic. And we want to have an impact. We want to sign up for this idea of a renaissance. Let's bring back beauty. Let's return to family values. Let's have a more beautiful existence. Let's stop poisoning our water and food supply. Like let's change the world. And I want that too. I want that desperately. I'm working on it as hard as I can. But the truth is, the only realistic place to start is with yourself. It's an internal renaissance. And if every person individually embodies that, then we will then, by obvious proxy, and the collective just now be in a renaissance, because every person will be embodying it in their little universe. It starts with one person. That one person can then impact their family. That family can then impact their local community. That local community can then start to change a combination of communities, a small state network that might be able to influence nationwide policies, and then global from there. Like it's this beautiful trickle down. And when we get into the metaphysics of it all, your internal world might be the only thing going on. You might actually be the only thing in this universe. So take pride in that and understand that everything you do inside will make your life more magical. And you may feel like you're at war with your reality right now. You're going to a job you hate. You're in a relationship that's toxic. You hate the way you look. You're trapped in a body that you don't like. I promise you, what looks and appears like an external war is an internal war. And it's a battle for your soul. And the white pill, the positive thing, is that the ultimate victory is already won. The good guys win in the end. It's always true, always has been true. And so your role right now is to take up your cross, to pick up your sword, and go slay the dragon. And it starts inside. It's not this big daunting thing. You don't need to go change the world. You literally just need to change yourself. And by changing yourself, you literally change the world.
Beautiful, man. Zach, thank you so much for doing this. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do it?
Yeah. Number one thing I would say is you can obviously subscribe to my Substack and newsletter, and then you'll kind of be roped into updates and all the things going on in my universe, as well as like the writing that I'm doing. So if you like any of the writing that I do, there's a place to find more of it. If you want to message me, Instagram and Twitter, now X, are my two platforms that have a messaging vehicle. My DMs, I'm currently at the place where I still respond to all DMs that I get. If you go into a folder that I can't see, I promise I still check those every once in a while. So I will respond to all messages at the time of recording this. So please message me with your thoughts, whether you have a question on something we touched on today or you see something on my page, you want more details, DM me. I just want to help. I genuinely do. Like, it's hard to believe in this kind of transactional world we live in, but I love these kind of conversations, and those DM conversations, I've seen lives changed for myself. I've seen trips planned, businesses built. Like, there's magic out there. So reach out if you're curious, and then subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, just for more of what's going on, doing behind the scenes vlogs, podcast, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm out there. I'm pretty chronically online. So hit me up on any of my platforms and I'll get back to you.
Beautiful. Well, we'll leave all those links in the description so people can follow you. Zach, this was amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. And for everyone who's listening, go follow Zach. Before you do, just leave us a like, a subscription, and a review of the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, whatever you listen to your podcast, so we can keep doing this. Okay? Everyone, thank you so much. Take care. Zach, thank you so much. This was amazing.
Thanks, brother. Be the